Thank you to all of you for coming. My name is Thomas Berry, and I am the last one. So good for you for making it all the way to the end. No, my name is Thomas Berry with Berg Compliance Solutions. I'm an EHS consultant, have been for about a year and a half now, with Berg specifically, and I've been given the distinct pleasure of finishing off today's ARMA 2019 event by giving you all a deep dive into the Lockout Tagout standard, which is more formally known as the Control of Hazardous Energy Standard. Now, before we go into anything specifically about the background of the standards, any of the specific cases that we're going to be talking about, I want to give you all at least a little bit of background, if you don't already know about what this whole standard is all about, what its purpose is. And the main purpose being that it's put in place in order to prevent injuries related to maintenance workers performing maintenance, servicing machines or equipment, and preventing any kind of release of hazardous energy, hazardous stored energy in that process. So that's what Lockout Tagout is all about. That's the main purpose of it. And we do that with the use of a lockout device and a tagout device, whether it be just simple padlock, plug locks, ball valve locks, air hose locks, or airline locks. There's all kinds of different things that go into that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It is consistently found in OSHA's National Emphasis Program, may not be directly listed as Lockout Tagout or Control of Hazardous Energy under that National Emphasis Program. I think Casey had mentioned that it was called, they were analogously calling it amputations. So they're focusing on amputations in the National Emphasis Program, or they might call it hazardous machinery. But whether it's talking about machines that you're working on, you're operating, that's on one side of the spectrum, right? On the other side of the spectrum, it's are we performing some kind of maintenance on it? And that's how those items under the National Emphasis Program will actually relate to Lockout Tagout. So it is very important in terms of regulatory compliance as well. And we'll talk about that. So why are we communicating this to you guys right now? Why are we talking about Lockout Tagout right now? First of all, Lockout Tagout injuries tend to be on the more gruesome side. It doesn't matter how amazing of an engineer you are or a master electrician you are, even the best tend to mess up at some point, right? And even Steph Curry tends to miss a three-pointer every now and again, right? So it doesn't matter what kind of background you have, there is still some possibility for serious injury in OSHA, and Lockout Tagout injuries tend to lean more on the gruesome side. Reason number two, regulatory compliance, as we had talked about before. Joanne mentioned in the very beginning, Lockout Tagout standard, I think was cited 51 times. That particular paragraph in the standard, talking about individual procedures, is what she had mentioned in the very, very beginning of our conference today. That was the 7th most cited standard, and that was under Lockout Tagout. So obviously, it's very important to OSHA, very important to all safety professionals, should be important to you as well, okay? All right, so here on the left, you'll see the Lotto authorized agenda. So under the Lockout Tagout standard, you have Lotto authorized training and Lotto effective training. On the left, you have the Lotto authorized agenda, what maintenance personnel would get. We're not talking about that today. Today, we're talking about kind of a deep dive into the OSHA standard, major components of the program, and then the second half is going to be special cases or special scenarios revolving around typical questions that we get from a lot of our clients, and ones that I've seen throughout a lot of my Lotto projects that I've done. I've done projects ranging from 70 to 100 pieces of machinery, 100 to 120 pieces of machinery, huge projects that take a lot of time and effort and get everybody in it. So we have a lot of questions that come from everybody, and that's what we'll see in this third section here. And then we'll finish off with an individual Lockout Tagout procedure and what goes into one of those and what you should have at minimum and what best practices many companies will do, including us. All right, so here you can see OSHA's webpage listing off all the sections of the Code of Federal Regulations for general industry. There's one for maritime, there's one for construction, there's all types of industries, but on the website you'll see all these sections laid out. Dive a little bit further into it, and you'll see section 147 there, Control of Hazardous Energy Lockout Tagout Standard, under which there's only one appendix that you have to worry about, and that specifically lays out the minimal procedures for a lockout tagout procedure. So that's what a lot of companies will do, at least will base their procedures on. If you have at least what happened or what you see in the Appendix A, you will have enough in your procedure. All right, so a little bit about the background, generally speaking, of the standard. Again, we're worried about preventing accidents to protect not only the employees, but also the environment and the machine itself from any kind of further exacerbated catastrophe after that malfunction or whatever happens during that maintenance procedure. Just some general requirements here. You have equipment-specific controls and procedures, as we mentioned before, was the number 7 most cited standard or paragraph of the standard. And then training, as I mentioned before. Now there is 3 technical categories. You have affected and other, or 2 different categories. Usually they're paired together. And then you have authorized employee training for those maintenance personnel who are going to actually be performing that maintenance. So that's who will be the ones that get that kind of training. All right, so there's two sides of the coin, 2 sides of the standard, essentially, that I wanted to break down for you before we get into specific scenarios. On one side, you have Section 147. It talks about procedures necessary to disable machinery or equipment in general. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have Section 333, which is actually mentioned in Section 147, that talks about this, essentially the same thing: how you lock and tag out, how you perform maintenance on machines, but specifically for electrical equipment, whether it be energized or de-energized. All right. So a little bit more diving into it, a little bit more. Section 147. Again, we're looking at procedures necessary to disable machinery, equipment, general electrical, pneumatic, hydraulic, whatever kind of chemical you have running through the machine, any kind of mechanical motion that's whether it's gravity, if it's just a piece of machinery that at a resting state is supposed to be down, and before you start performing maintenance on it, it's left up. That gravity, that mechanical motion is considered another potential energy source, right, that we have to control for, whether it be blocking it off physically or simply putting it down before you start working on it. Nobody's going to work under an industrial elevator while it's elevated, right? So another type of energy source that you're controlling for there. All right, Section B on the other side of the coin for the electrical standard, talking about the electrical standard now, right? It's the same, again, it's the same for electrical work. Requires workers to use a lot of procedures for electrical work. In this case, paragraph B that we're talking about here is when you're working on or near exposed de-energized parts. So if you're working on de-energized parts where you turn off that electrical equipment, yes, you do have to lock and tag that out, right? But on the other side, the paragraph right after that paragraph, paragraph C, talks about working on or near exposed energized parts, so the actually energized parts. And if you are going to work on energized parts, you need to have 2 things. What are those things? You need to be qualified personnel, and you need to have your electrical PPE in place. Why? So we can avoid anything like that, right? Or any injuries that would come from that. So these 2 are very specific requirements that go into any maintenance worker that is going to perform maintenance on energized equipment, okay? Now, question for the audience. I think we actually have talked about this before. How would you define a qualified person? There we go, exactly what we had mentioned before. Very good. I don't have any candy or Cliff Bars or anything to throw you in. Next time. But yes, one with a recognized degree or professional certificate, extensive knowledge and experience, and one who is capable of design, analysis, evaluation, and specifications in the subject work. Now that last one is where the company, the employer, you guys can determine if that capability truly is there. But in terms of what is proof of the competency is that recognized degree or professional certificate with the extensive years of experience, right? So, little disclaimer: every time I finish a section, I'll have a question for you in blue, so that you know the end of the section is there. We'll have 3 of those, so that you guys can just keep track as we go along. I didn't have any handouts, so this would be a good way to keep track as we're going. All right, so shifting into the second section here, major components of a lockout tagout program. Control of hazardous energy. What goes into, generally speaking, what goes into a program that you need to have in place at your company? You have your written program, your equipment-specific procedures, your annual procedure assessment, so your periodic inspections of your procedures, whatever kind of employee training you do have in place, Lotto authorized, Lotto affected, and then your Lotto equipment. What kind of devices are you going to get? You can get it from all kinds of manufacturers all over the place. They're very obscure designs for lockout devices all over the place, very easy to get. Now in terms of written program, what does that actually mean though? What do I need to have documented if I needed to show proof of this written program that you speak of? Well, there are 3 parts of that, 3 things that three components of that. periodic inspections, lockout, tagout training records, and energy control procedures. These are the three major gears of what's required in a written program, right? So C4, paragraph C4I says that you need to have developed and documented and utilized for the control of potentially hazardous energy. You need to have those energy control procedures in place, individual energized individual lockout tagout procedures for each piece of energized equipment. Now it may look something like this, as obscure and detailed and creative as something like this. Whatever makes it easiest for your employees to use, for your maintenance team to use. But generally speaking, like I had mentioned in that Appendix B or Appendix A that we talked about, you'll have a minimum of these certain steps that you have to have in place so that lockout tagout procedure would be complete. First of all, and we'll talk about this a little bit later towards the very end when we actually go through an individual procedure. But it may look something like this. It may look something like ours. It's supposed to be yellow, not a weird mustard color, but it might look something like ours, where you have the minimal steps, and you have the more user-friendly version of it, right? More of the best practices side. But again, you always need to have those minimal steps that go into the procedure. Like I mentioned, Appendix A is literally this image right here, right? So this is the minimum. And you'll have steps for de-energizing your equipment, and you'll have steps for re-energizing your equipment, okay? All right, secondly, in that written program, you need to have LOTO training. The employer shall certify that employee training has been accomplished. And you need to have that, according to paragraph C7IV, that does need to be recorded. Every time you have LOTO authorized training, every time you have LOTO effective training, usually those are paired together. So definitely keep records of that kind of training. Employee names and dates of training. All right, and thirdly and finally, as part of that written program of things that you need to have documented, periodic inspections. C6II says the employer shall certify that the periodic inspections have been performed. We'll talk about this in a little bit more depth here in a second. But yes, on an annual basis, these do need to be inspected to test for accuracy and to test for efficiency. Okay? All right, another question. Which of the following employee tasks do not fall under maintenance and servicing under the lockout tagout standard? Setting up an installation, inspecting, lubricating, repairs, changing tools, unjamming, cleaning, adjusting. Which one of these does not fall under lockout tagout? Trick question, they all do. They all do, very nice. Very good, very good. Yes, they all do. Every single one of these falls under the lockout tagout standard, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. All right, so moving into the third section here, I'll have some scenarios for you based on a lot of different questions that I've received, different kind of hair-splitting moments that we've had in the process of making our procedures and a lot of the projects that I've been a part of. So our first one here, scenario number one, talks about the standard application. All right, so servicing maintenance taking place during normal production operations is covered by the standard only if employees are required to remove or bypass the guard or safety device, or they're required to put any part of their body in the point of contact or any other kind of danger zone. True or false? There's no exception to this rule. It's correct. Brittany Spears says it's false. All right. The reason being, you have minor tool change exemption. This is where this actually directly comes into play. Minor tool change exemption says that if the task is routine, repetitive, and integral to the use of that equipment, then it no longer falls under it is exempted from falling under the lockout tagout standard. So for example, anybody have CNC machines at their place? Right, a lot of them. All you got to do, and you're sitting there opening the guard, putting in different tools all the time. It's routine, it's repetitive, and it's integral. You can't work on a new piece if you don't have that new tool, or if you don't change out that tool, right? So that's a good example of where that minor tool change exemption would come into play, and where you might not have to lock it out, or you might not have to lock it out for that particular task of just minor tool changes, right? All right, next one, out of service versus maintenance. Question, here's the long version, a little bit boring. Short version, question, Can I use a lotto lock on a machine that is out of service? Say you're getting rid of that machine. Say you're selling that machine and it's out of service. Can I use a lockout tagout lock on a machine that is out of service?
Why not? Because I'm going to ask a question. If it's something that can, even though it's been disconnected and out of use, it can still be engaged where it poses a hazard, I would say you can lock it out.
Well, I mean, what kind of task are you locking it out for?
I'm just saying if it's a machine that has a mechanical mechanism on it that can actually snap down and hurt somebody, yeah, you can lock it out.
So right here, that's a good point. But right here, we're simply talking about the semantics of it. It's really just some people I've seen have used out of service tags that literally say out of service, and they have their clearly a lockout tag out lock on it. So and it was actually being worked on under maintenance. So answer being no. Jake Gyllenhaal says no. So it would not quote preserve the integrity of the lockout tag out program. So what they're looking for here is that standardization across all your locks and tags. They'll have to be the same. If they're not, then that communication that you're trying to convey is inconsistent. Okay, so that's what they would consider.
I'll give you sort of two examples that we routinely see. One is you have an electrical disconnect that you're not using anymore. The equipment's been disconnected. You've got the breaker shut off upstream. You may want to put a lock on just to make sure. Just don't make sure it's a lockout tagout lock.
Very good.
Or
That's a good example.
you have some process tanks that you don't want employees to accidentally open up. Maybe you're waiting for, a truck driver comes in, that's what he connects to pump some chemicals in. A lot of times you'll put like ball valve on it and lock it. That's not a lockout tagout situation. So you want to make sure that lock is different than what you use for lockout tagout.
Yes. Yeah. And usually, I mean, very, very consistently, you'll see those very clearly red lockout padlocks. And those are pretty standard that I've seen across at least a lot of my clients. A lot of our clients will have those. All right, next one. Again, referring to the application of this standard. Does it apply to you? True or false? Employee training is conducted on an annual basis. Trick question. False. Camila Cabello says false. Additionally, whenever there is a change in their job assignments, change in machines, equipment, processes, new hazard, change in new energy controls. Now, if you happen to add a machine, a whole CNC machine or whatever kind of machine that has 7 different energy types of energies running through it, yeah, you probably need to do some extra training there.
What about authorized employees?
Sorry?
What about training for authorized employees?
If they're going to be the ones performing maintenance on that particular machine, then we retrain them for that one. And that refresher training would come into play. All right, fourth question, or fourth scenario here. Exclusive control exemption. All right, in this situation, we have one disconnect, an electrical disconnect that is being worked on by an employee. That person has shut it off. Person has removed the fuses. They are working 5 unobstructed feet away from that disconnect. If a person wanted to come and energize the disconnect, they would literally have to walk right by him and do so. Question here: is the disconnect under exclusive control of the employee performing the maintenance, or is the lockout tagout device still required to be placed on the disconnect switch? Is the disconnect switch under the exclusive control of the employee performing the maintenance? This pertains to one of those exemptions, very uncommonly talked about exemptions that I was mentioning before. No, Danny Glover says no. So it turns out that exemption only pertains to de-energizing cord and plug. So single energy source machines that are cord and plug only. If that was a single energy source, it was just electrical, but it's a hardwired electrical disconnect, that exemption does not pertain. Okay? Next one, annual inspection of procedures. This particular paragraph goes on to require periodic inspection of energy controls procedures. In order to meet the requirement in section paragraph C6IA, which says that the lockout tagout or the lotto authorized personnel that is performing maintenance or that is actually performing that procedure, using that procedure, cannot be the same as the person that is inspecting, right? So again, in order to meet that requirement, can one authorized employee who is performing the lockout tagout procedures observe and inspect a second authorized employee who is performing the lockout procedures? Messi says yes. Yes, that is okay. It's kind of like what Rick was asking earlier, one of our gentlemen here in the front. So how do you perform that periodic inspection? You have one lotto authorized personnel that is actually using the procedure, and you have another lotto authorized personnel who is inspecting that person for accuracy and efficiency of that particular procedure. Okay. All right, last one here. Annual inspections of procedures. Is every lockout procedure required to have a periodic inspection, or can lockout procedures be grouped for machines that are of similar construction and operation? What do you think? Can they be grouped if they're similar? Yes. Okay. Judge James says yes. So, quote, employer may elect to group procedures as described above if they and then inspect a representative sample of each of those. As long as those machines operate the same, if you have 300 of the same kind of functioning CNC machines, those would be ones where you can, when you're doing that periodic inspection of your procedures, you can pick a representative sample inside of that instead of inspecting every single one of those procedures, right? So Judge James says yes. Question for the audience to move into the last section here. What information at minimum must be included on a tag that has been placed at an energy isolation device? When you have when your maintenance person puts a lock and tag out, or a lock and tag on there, what does that tag need to have at minimum? So you have who, you're right there, and what. Actually, these are the two paragraphs where these are the actual formal requirements. You can put when, you can put why, you can put all those things, but these are the two that are formally required under the standard. You can put the picture of the person if everybody knows who they are, or you can put the common name that everybody calls them. But you need to have some kind of verbiage that says do not start, do not operate, do not open, close, energize, those kinds of things. So those are explicitly laid out. All right, so to finish off, we'll talk about an individual procedure and what should go into that when you're making those or when you have a consultant coming in and helping you out with that. So step number one, you have notifying your employees about that shutdown. So just to remind all of you, here at the top, this first whole section here is all about shutting down your equipment and how you're de-energizing your equipment to prepare for maintenance, right? So your first step is going to be notifying your employees that you're going to do so. Second is reviewing your lockout procedure. These four steps in the middle here are going to be the ones where it tends to get more machine specific and where you might want to go above and beyond and make it more user friendly of a procedure. Add some color in there, add some usability in there, improve that human procedure interface kind of interaction there. Step 3, 4, perform shutdown, isolate your energy, lock out your energy, dissipate your energy, and of course, verify your isolation at the very end. Make sure it's de-energized before you actually go in there and do that. So these 7 steps are the minimum necessary to perform a lockout tagout procedure properly. And then the same thing. And then here on the bottom, you'll see restoring machines to energy. So re-energizing your machines, checking your equipment, make sure that all tools are out of the way and out of hazardous locations. Check your area for employees, make sure all employees are outside of the machine. That's a big one. Verification that your controls are in the off or neutral position so that when you turn it on, nothing crazy happens. Lockout, tagout, removing all your locks and tags, and then notifying your employees that the machine is ready for use and servicing or maintenance has completed. Okay. All right, so this is an example of one of ours, what one of ours would look like and how that would change. I've done projects on lockout, tagout with 100 machines at a time where we had to go through each of those, and it is a time-consuming process. It does take some man-hours, yes. That's to be totally honest with everybody, but that's what it takes to have these procedures put in place and to be able to control for all these types of energy sources. So here is what we just talked about. I have that de-energization process in a quick format up here at the top. You have all your information about the specific type of machine up there at the top, equipment, manufacturer, model number, serial number, those kinds of things. Starting off on the left there, you have your energy source. It may be yellow for electrical, it may be red for pneumatic, blue for bath water, green for whatever kind of chemicals that you have running through the machine. There at the bottom, you'll see the quick version of the re-energization process, or removing your lockout tagout procedure, or removing your lockout tagout devices. And then going over to the second column, you have your machine lotto location. Where is that machine? Where is that machine in relation to all the other machines in the building, so you can quickly find out where they are. Method and devices needed. This is where we usually point out specifically what kind of tag or what kind of lock would be used to isolate this energy. And then here on the right, you'll have a picture of your lockout point, or your energy isolation device, whether it be a knife switch or an airline quick disconnect where you're gonna attach an airline lock. And here, what we recently wanted to do was actually add a place where you can put in a wide shot of your equipment. So it's all you can see how it's different from the minimal procedure, right? It's a little bit more user-friendly. It has photos in there. Color coding makes it easier to read and a little bit faster to read for any maintenance personnel there. So we'll add a wide shot of the machine, wide shot photo of the machine there. So, and that concludes lockout tagout deep dive. It's a deep dive, so come back up. Come around.
I had a question.
Yes, sir.
Where should that procedure be kept?
Sorry?
Where should that procedure be kept?
At least digitally, right? At least where the maintenance workers can access that very easily. Same thing as HazCom, like it was mentioned earlier. As long as you have a copy of that, they can readily access. But if you have a password, if only administrators have passwords and operators on the floor or maintenance personnel don't have passwords, then they can't access it. That's going to be non-compliant. They have to be able to have that readily accessible, right? A lot of my clients will actually print them all out, laminate them, put them on each machine.
OSHA does not get specific on where they have to be.
They just have to be accessible.
When we're going to use that process, needs to have access to this.
Yeah.
Another question, what about the keys to the locks?
Each maintenance worker needs to have their own. Nobody can share keys.
So each person has to have a set of keys?
And a key to that lock.
Right, right.
Because part of it, it's an accountability program.
Yeah.
So you only have one key, one lock. You can't go and buy master locks that have multiple keys. And then you have to manage. There should not be another person who has a key to that lock.
Can they be locked, say, like there's a maintenance office or cage, be kept there in a locked cabinet
Where if the maintenance workers had the access to that cabinet, yes, absolutely. I mean, we usually have stations. You can have lotto stations like on the wall.
What you're saying is because a lot of times you'll see like a long-term maintenance thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some locks that have been on it for 2 years, and asking where's the key, and they're like, I don't know. So it's the way that if you go by the standard, that key is only accessible to that employee. So it shouldn't be in a general maintenance shop that has a name on it, because I got a name on that tag that says who has the key. So that's who I'm going to go to. So if that employee leaves, they retire, somebody has to go in and change out the lock. Because that guy's not there anymore, that's who you're supposed to contact.
Any other questions?
Like the site manager, after he's determined he can't get a hold of him, and
You verified he's not there,
Yeah,
all those
yeah.
before you can cut it.
You have to reach out.
Actually talk about what to do in the event you got to cut it.
You have to reach out.
I will put a caveat on the training side. Authorized training, so for those authorized employees, has to be done annually. What he was more talking about is if you get new equipment, new procedures, we revise the procedures, then you got to do that first.
Yeah, ours generally for just general populations like every 3 years, but that's why I asked the question about the yearly, because we have maintenance teams that's what they do every day.
They get them every, they still have
Absolutely.
to have the training every year. Your affected employees, those who operate the machine, technically, sort of like HazCom, only needs to do once, but it's always good to every now and then, remind them on a toolbox talk, or depending on what your process.
We usually like to pair them together, just because the maintenance team's gonna get them anyways. Give them a little refresher.
Can you give an example of an affected employee? Are we talking secretary, or are we talking?
So there's affected and other, right, like I was mentioning. So affected is going to be your operator of that machine, operators of that machine that's being worked on, right? So those are going to be the affected. And then the other personnel is kind of paired together. They get the same kind of training, essentially. It's more of awareness of what the program is about and what the locks and tags means. But the others typically refers to those salesmen, office personnel, that kind of stuff.
Other times what we'll do is we'll throw that in new hire orientation safety. See a lock and tag, don't touch it.
Pretty
It's
simple,
about as
effective
simple
training.
as
Yeah,
it is for you.
yeah, yeah.
And the other group also includes any sort of non-personnel visitors, anyone who's just unfamiliar with the facility as a whole, and more specifically, anyone who's unfamiliar with the equipment and procedures that are commonly conducted at that company. So,
Any more questions at all? During these projects, I get nonstop questions, so it's